So every day in our lives, we're constantly trying to balance multiple things, right? As students, we have assignments, tests, projects. Some of us have jobs and we always work. Our friends, they're always trying to get us to hang out, right? They're convincing us, they're saying, yo, like, let me pay for your food, just come out. And you're like, okay. We're always on social media where like people are bumping into us, we're bumping into people. And our family, they're always telling us that something new and exciting has come up back home just to get us to visit, but nothing is happening. So all these stressors sometimes cause us to compromise either our mental or our physical health. The problem is that once we compromise our mental health, we may start having maladaptive thoughts and cognitions. And what does maladaptive really mean? Well, mal means a malfunction, and adaptive relates to an adaptation. Makes sense. And so an example of this in humans is suicidal ideation that may then lead to suicide. But what's really important to focus on here is that even though it's maladaptive, it has still come to adapt somehow in our evolutionary history. And the question is, why has that happened? So suicide is a complex phenomenon that's difficult to understand. Evolutionary theory suggests that natural selection will select against any deleterious gene or behavior, eventually removing it from the gene pool. So then how does it exist and persist today in human societies? Sociologists and scientists often turn to evolutionary theory in order to answer difficult questions like this. So looking at different species and their suicidal behaviors can give us an example of why this may have come to fruition in the human population. Here is my good friend, the Australian redback spider. Okay, for the male of this species, it's very, very difficult and very rare to find a female in her web. So when he actually does find a female, you know he's hit the jackpot. They'll come together, as spiders do, and they'll mate. Cool. But here's the really interesting part. Once they're done mating, the male is going to do a backflip, all right? And right into the female's mouth, he's going to get eaten by her. Like, why? The reason being is that the environment is really rough. They live in a desolate outback where resources are very slim. And producing eggs by the female spider is energetically really expensive. And so the male offers himself and his body as a source of nutrition. So this kind of makes sense. Now she can pass on his genes, and that's good for evolution. What's interesting is that adaptive suicidal behaviors are not just unique to the Australian redback spiders. The Camponotus ant, the American wood rat, and also just the everyday bumblebee present different types of suicidal behaviors that are adaptive in their own way. What does this mean? What does this mean to humans and suicidal adaptation? So in humans, we have different suicidal ideations, and what does this mean to us? For the spider, this means that their genes are passed on to the next generation. Reproductive success is the main goal of evolution. And so this feels a little counterintuitive, but provides us a good framework of how someone with maladaptive thoughts and cognitions may think about themselves and their environment. And so if we take an example of an individual with their maladaptive thoughts and cognitions, they may feel themselves a burden to their friends and family. And this may feel to them as a dampening of their reproductive success. These people now have to allocate their resources in order to help the individual out. And thus, they're causing themselves a burden. And this phenomenon is known as burdensomeness to kin. This also escalates the behaviors leading up to suicide. This process is known as hypothesis testing. And what this is the individual will test their value in the community that they exist in, assessing people's responses to their outreach for support. It starts out with simply asking for help. Hey, can you help me out? If there's no response, they may then escalate to bargaining behavior. And this is an attempt to increase your value in the society that you live in. It's the idea that I'll help you now and maybe you can help me in the future. If there's no response to this, then someone may escalate to self-injurious behavior. This is a very outward visible sign of distress and a cry out for help. If there's still no response from the community, they may then end up escalating into suicidal behavior. Everything that I've talked about thus far is in no way meant to justify suicide or suicidal behaviors. The purpose of this presentation is to steer away from that. We want to guide people into recognizing signs and symptoms of suicidal ideations in order to prevent them. So, what are the signs of suicidal ideations and depressives? So, there are many. Some of them include, again, self-injurious behavior, changes in behavior and personality, changes in sleeping and eating patterns, social isolation, and decreased academic and work performance, just to name a few. A lot of these things can be easily noticed and changed. One study found that adolescents that simply disclosed information about their suicidal ideations caused a positive reaction from others, thus reducing their non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors. It really goes to show how just lending a listening ear can really go a long way. And you can honestly make a difference by just helping out those around you. Making your friends and family feel validated and important really makes a huge difference on how they feel about themselves. The first step is being aware, and the second step is saving a life. Thank you.